Hello, loves, and welcome back to another Fluffenhammer adjacent, maybe another Ages of Chaos. I don't know. It's all very loose, isn't it? Depending on what I feel like labeling the video at any given time. But I was digging through some of the boxes in my little place here. I've got boxes full of books and magazines and all sorts of crap, just loads of Libra basically. And I was quite surprised because I thought I chucked it out. I'm surprised I haven't chucked it out, quite frankly. I found the fourth ed Chaos Space Marine Codex. You remember the video I did for that? The Ages of Chaos one that's really, really negative? And I warned you it was going to be negative. Very interesting. I haven't looked at this for a long time. It was a long time ago now, this was. It was a long time ago. We're going to talk about this. The fluff. I'm going to get Gruff and Andy talking about this. I really am, because it was such an interesting period. It was such an interesting period. This is when I bowed out. This was the I've got it in my hands right now. I know you can't see it, but I've got it in my hands. This was the product that made me bow out for the first time since my childhood. Since I first started the hobby when I was 8 years old, this was the one that did it because it's so bad. There was this and the Dark Angels Codex from 4th Ed. They were awful, awful books. I don't know what Games Workshop were thinking with these ones. Actually, yes, I do. I'm being facetious. I know exactly what they were thinking with these books. They were thinking we need to water it down, we need to dumb it down a little bit, we need to make it more accessible, and we also need to push particular kits. We need to push the big expensive kits, and that's exactly what they're doing with this book. It's so cynical. It's such a cynical exercise. And it's not all bad. It's not all bad. There are good things in this book, and we'll discuss them on the main Fluff and Hammer. There are good things. It's not as awful as I remember it. It's pretty bad, but it's not as awful as I remember it being. Anywho, that's not why we're here. We're here, you can tell by the title, we're here to talk about one of my favorites. One of my favorites. We've done all of the cult legions, and now it's time to do my favorite of the undivided legions. Oh my god. I remember picking up my first Chaos Codex. It was the second ed Chaos Space Marine Codex, and it was the second codex I ever owned. It was the second big book from Games Workshop I ever owned. The first was the second ed Eldar Codex, and we'll talk about that another day. Because, despite all the Chaos stuff on this channel, my first army, my first love for Warhammer 40,000 was the Eldar. They were my introduction. The second ed Eldar Codex was the one that told me everything. That's the first time I read about the Horus Heresy. It was the first time I read about the birth of Slaanesh, the Great Crusade, the Imperium, the Craft Worlds, all of that gubbins, all of that stuff. That was the book. My baseline. That was my baseline. And it gave me a fairly good grounding, I've got to say. There's a lot of good material in that book. But the second ed Chaos Space Marine Codex was really the one. And in the second ed Chaos Space Marine Codex, you didn't just have the more traditional Chaos Legions, the cult legions, the Thousand Sons, Emperor's Children, Death God, and World Eaters. You had the Undivided Legions, all detailed, all given their own particular panoply and mythology and aspects and history. And I loved that to bits. I was so enamored of that. I mean, I was like, how old was I at that point? I must have been like maybe 9 or 10, maybe even younger. It could have been 8. I was very young. But that book obsessed me. I loved all that stuff. I loved reading about the Iron Warriors and their sieges. I loved reading about the Black Legion and their shame in the face of the rout from Terror. I loved the Night Lords. Oh my god, reading about the Night Lords and what complete and utter cynical asshats they are. But the one that really got me was the Word Bearers. Love the Word Bearers. In the Word Bearers, what you had were your classic Chaos Space Marines. Your Chaos Space Marines, they were red and they were silver and black. They looked like your classic Chaos Space Marines, and their background detailed them as basically being the religious fanatics of the lot. They were the classic Chaos Space Marines, consumed by the worship of chaos. Their every waking moment was spent in worshipping chaos, bringing the word of chaos to the Imperium, erecting great dark cathedrals, sacrificing innocents, and all of that gubbins. They had this wonderful sort of occult patina to them, and I loved that. I loved that so much. And I loved the fact that they were the first Chaos Space Marines as well. It wasn't the Black Legion or the Sons of Horus as they were. It wasn't Horus himself, it was the Word Bearers. They were the ones who first started worshipping chaos before Horus fell, and I loved that. There wasn't much about them in the Second Ed Chaos Codex, apart from that and their colour scheme. There really wasn't much about them. They were kind of bare bones at that point. The history hadn't had time to sort of swell and develop yet. And that really wouldn't happen until much later, when you had the Third Ed Chaos Space Marine Code. You had this weird interim. When Third Ed hit, there was this weird interim where you had the really awful original Third Ed Chaos Space Marine Codex, which was pretty bad. And then they started to introduce the Index Astartes articles, which provided a much deeper and richer history on the Space Marine legions, all of them, the Loyalists and the Chaos Space Marines, and gave them new rules and new ways of operating. And the word bearers one really did change the dynamic quite profoundly. It was really, really good. It detailed a little bit more about Lorgar, the Primarch of the word bearers. It told you a little bit more about how they operate. So the word bearers are like Imperial Rome in the sense that they're completely superstitious. They believe in auguries, they believe in soothsaying and portents and omens, and that's how they conduct warfare. They are guided by what the Dark Apostles say, basically the visions and the fevers and the dreams and the omens of the Dark Apostles, how whatever form they take. So word bearers armies can look like anything. They can be really unwieldy and wacky, depending on what the Dark Apostle thinks the Dark Gods want of them. They can also be very strange in terms of their beliefs. There are schisms within the word bearers. I mean, the word bearers operate from a demon world in the Eye of Terror called Sicarius. And Sicarius it's exactly what you would think. It's a giant, hellish cathedral, basically. The entire world is just one gigantic temple to horror and insanity and suffering, but it's also heavily, heavily prescriptive. The Dark Council, who are the highest word bearers, apart from Lorgar himself, who's sealed away, by the way. Lorgar hasn't been seen for 10,000 years, you know. Since the Horus Heresy, the flight from Terra, he sealed himself away in his Reclusiam on Sicarius and hasn't been seen since. Nobody really knows what he's up to. Although it is believed that he still sort of leads his legion through by sending them dreams and signs and portents, and he's still trying to sort of like manipulate the warp and spread the glory of chaos from that Reclusium. He's a demon primarch, by the way. He could potentially be the strongest of the demon primarchs if you think about it. I mean, along with Perturabo, he's one of the only ones who has the blessings of all the chaos powers and not just one of them. He's not like Mortarion and and Magnus, who are blessed by one chaos power. He was elevated by all of them. So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's very, very interesting. They are this weird sort of pagan, almost pantheistic lot who believe that chaos is the truth. They're sincere as well. That's the interesting thing about the word bearers. They are not, for all of the duplicity that they exercise, and they fucking do. They are a duplicitous bunch. They themselves believe it. They actually do believe that chaos is the true metaphysics of this universe. And it's not that they're deluded or lied to by the chaos powers. They understand. Certainly the Dark Apostles and the higher ranks amongst them, they understand the nature of the warp. They understand what the gods are. They understand that they're expressions of like human foible and inspiration and drive and emotion. They get that, but they believe that they are also reflections of the divine in humanity. They actually believe that chaos is the truth and that it can bring humanity transcendence, a kind of transcendence. There is a utopianism inherent to Lorgar and the word bearers. It's just a dark utopianism. And if they had their way, they would basically establish a theocracy of chaos. And what that would look like, well, who knows, right? Zeech only knows. Um, but they believe in the aspects of the chaos powers, and they believe in their ways and their means and their modus operandi. Lorgar in particular, Lorgar there was not much detail on in the Index Astartes article, or even in the 3.5 codex that came in the wake of that, where you had the Legion specific army lists. There really wasn't a great deal of information other than the fact that the word bearers fight alongside cultists and demons quite a lot. They tend to drive chaos cultists forward ahead of themselves, along with the likes of possessed and these entities that are blessed by the chaos powers, as it were. Lorgar himself, there really wasn't much about him. We know that he was one of the smarter Primarchs. He's one of the more studious Primarchs, one of the more academic Primarchs, a bit like Magnus the Red, but nowhere near as powerful. And we also know that he had this need for meaning, this need for poetry and meaning in existence. And he originally got that from the Emperor and from the Imperium and whatnot, which he kind of mythologized and turned into a religious belief system and then was censored for it by the Emperor. Um, the thing that really turned the word bearers on their head and made them much more interesting were the Horus Heresy books, as they did for most of the legions. In the very first Horus Heresy book, you get Erebus, one of the key characters from the word bearers, one of the key characters from the entire Horus Heresy, and one who exemplifies what the word bearers are. Erebus is the one who not only went around corrupting the other legions, establishing the warrior lodges, which were kind of like veiled chaos cults. He is also the one who whispered in Horus's ear, who led Horus to Davin, where he was wounded by the demon weapon, where he then experienced his fever, his fugue, where he encountered the powers of chaos, and where he ultimately made his decision to turn on the Emperor. Erebus did that. And Erebus, when you read the books that specifically explore the word bearers, like Aaron Dembski Bowden's incredible First Heretic, you find out that Erebus and Cor Pharaon were also the ones that turned Lorgar. Lorgar didn't know about this. He did not know about chaos until Erebus and Cor Pharaon um, basically turned him in that direction. They manipulated him in that direction. When the Emperor censored the word bearers, and in the Horus Heresy books, it's much more profound than it was in the previous material. So in the previous material, Lorgar comes off as a little bit immature, quite frankly. It just says that the Emperor censored him for building like cathedrals and stuff like that, and taking time to preach the imperial cult rather than getting on with his fucking business as a space marine and going out there and killing things. That was the purpose of the space marine legions, right? That's what does it in the original fluff. Here, to censor Lorgar, the Emperor sends the ultramarines to obliterate their greatest city, the city that they established called Monarchia on their homeworld of Colchis, which was Monarchia was very much like Prospero on it's very much like Tisca on Prospero, the Thousand Sons homeworld. It was a utopian society. It was a model of how imperial civilization ideally should work. But because of this perceived slight, the Emperor sent the Ultramarines to destroy it. And it's that that really sends Lorgar over the edge. And then Erebus and Cor Pharaon use that moment of weakness to subtly turn him towards the worship of chaos. But here's the interesting thing. Aaron Dembski Bowden does not go for the simplistic when it comes to Lorgar or the Word Bearers. Erebus is a bastard, yeah. Cor Pharaon is a bastard, absolutely. Those two are out for themselves. They only see in chaos their own aggrandizement. Lorgar doesn't. When his fleet take off again, and when they reach the edge of the Eye of Terror, Lorgar is like, no, I am going to see this for myself. I need to see the faces of the gods. I need to understand this. And he starts attuning himself to the warp. He starts listening to it. And it filters through him like music, like poetry. He actually, for him, the way he defines it is the music of the spheres. It's the music of creation. That's what the warp is. It's all potential. It's all dreams. It's all nightmares. It's all things to all men and women, and so much more beyond that. And that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to filter that discordant symphony throughout creation and use it to transform things. When he goes in, when he himself embarks on a pilgrimage into the Eye of Terror, which he does in a book called Aurelian, by the way, which is Lorgar's title, the golden one. Um, it's beautiful. Aaron Dembski Bowden powerfully resists making Lorgar just a frothing fanatic, just a zealot, just a weak person, basically. He is not that in any of these books, and it is a beautifully subtle portrayal of the character. What Lorgar is, ultimately, is a metaphysician. He's a metaphysician kin to Magnus the Red, not quite in the same way. Magnus is much more nuts and bolts about it. Magnus is all about the mathematics or the formulae. He's about the mechanics and the technicals of harnessing the warp. In his purview, the warp is a formula. It's a pattern, it's a design. Whereas for Lorgar, it's much more artistic. It's a song. It's a piece of music. It's a hymn. And that is what he experiences when he goes into the Eye of Terror and finds himself on one of the Crone worlds, one of the worlds of the ancient Eldari that was consumed by the warp during the birth of Slaanesh. He meets avatars of the gods. He actually meets messengers of the gods. Like for example, he meets a bloodthirster, which I think is Kabanda. Actually, it's one of the big bloodthirsters that Khorne sends to basically test him. And Lorgar beats the living shit out of it and basically says, if that's the best you've got, then I'm not interested. You see, he's not credulous, Lorgar. He's not credulous. He is not being duped by the Chaos powers. He wants to understand. He wants to enter into this on an even level. He wants to understand what they are, what they're offering, how they can bring about something akin to a vision for humanity. That's what he's after. And Aaron Dembski Bowden takes pains to make that apparent. It's a wonderful portrayal of the character because Lorgar's playing the long game. There comes a point, and it's during the book Betrayer, which is about the word bearers and the world eaters who embark on this crusade throughout the Ultramar system, the Empire of Ultramar. It becomes apparent that Lorgar is starting to transcend Erebus and Corferon. Of course he is. He's a Primarch, right? His intelligence is much higher than theirs, and his affinity for the warp is much higher than theirs as well, because he's born from it. That's another thing. The Primarchs are born from the warp. Part of the arcano science that went into making them is derived from the warp and from chaos, from the chaos powers. They're already tainted. They've already got it in them from the moment they're cultivated. And Lorgar understands this. So there comes a point in Betrayer where he talks about how he's now gone beyond Erebus and Corferon in his understanding of how the metaphysics of this universe work. In terms of his affinity for chaos, he's gone to the point whereby he can harness Angron's rage and self-loathing and frustration to create a warp storm around him and make him into what we know now, the demon Primarch of Khorne. He does that in Betrayer, and it's because he now hears and feels the music of chaos moving through him. It's absolutely incredible. I mean, it is a beautiful portrayal of the character. And that, along with how the word bearers themselves are generally portrayed in the Horus Heresy books, I love it to bits. They are As I say, they're not just frothing monsters and zealots, although there are those amongst them. There are those amongst them who actually do understand what they're doing, who understand what's going on. Lorgar's playing the long game, and I mean the really long game. There are moments in the Horus Heresy when he clearly knows what's going to happen 10,000 years from now. In the present day of the Imperium, he understands it, as does Erebus. It becomes apparent in the Siege of Terror that Erebus knows that the heresy is going to fail, quote unquote, by the terms of most. He is trying to bring about the condition of the Imperium and of the galaxy that we have now, 10,000 years later, because that has given the Chaos Powers their greatest servants, the traitor legions, but also their greatest avatars. It's given Zeech Araman, it's given Nurgle Typhus, it's given Slanesh Lucius, it's given Horn Khan, you know, and it's given them all Abaddon, Abaddon the Despoiler, who is in many respects greater than Horus. Not on a one-on-one level, not in terms of individual power, but in terms of his ability to make the universe his own, in terms of his ability to organize the powers of chaos and give them impetus. That's what it's done, and Erebus is kind of responsible for that, and therefore Lorgar is kind of responsible for that too. Lorgar understands that this is the long, 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 long game. And the way the word bearers manifest now, that is just a kind of byproduct of that. It's kind of a symptom of that. That's what he's trying to do from his Reclusiam in Sicarius. He's trying to bring about a particular vision of the universe, and he still seems to have that utopian vision. It's amazing. And by the way, this is not to say that the word bearers are not monsters. They are. They absolutely are. In terms of my own belief systems, they should be the ones I hate the most because I hate religious fanatics. I hate zealots. I hate fundamentalists. I can't stand them. I think they are the weakest, most destructive human beings in existence. Um, so I should hate the word bearers, but I don't. I think they're great. I think they're wonderful bad guys. I love art. Hobby wise, they're brilliant. Hobby wise, they are absolutely amazing. You can do so much with them because their imagery, like the imagery of the ecclesiarchy, derives from things like the Catholic Church, it derives from occultism, it derives from ancient religious rites and practices. Oh, there's so much you can do. You can give them robes, you can give them braziers, you can give them all sorts of mutations and icons and so much stuff. I love that to bits, and they are very, very well represented in the current Chaos Space Marine Codex, by the way. There are two detachments that really exemplify them. There's the Chaos Cultist detachment, which is really good for the word bearers, and there's the Pack Bound Zealots, which is it's the slaves to darkness. It's the word bearers. It's possessed. It's all of the warp blessed, dark, gribbly, weird stuff from the Chaos Space Marines, and I just love it. They are the purest. It's bizarre to say, but in many respects, they are the purest Chaos Space Marines because that is fundamentally what they are. They are the archetypal Chaos Space Marines in their red and their silver and their black with their horns and their mutations. They are absolutely wonderful. I mean, I had a word bearers army in with the 3.5 codex because I loved the word bearers back then. The way they worked in the 3.5 codex was you could take extra troop choices for them because they threw demons, hordes of demons at the opponent. So you could have loads of like plague bearers and demonettes and bloodletters, which was really good back then. That was really, really good, really strong. And I loved them to bits. I love my word bearers. I haven't collected them for a long time, but I could convince myself, especially under the 10th Ed Chaos Space Marine Codex. I really could convince myself, my loves. Oh no, don't stop. No, you can't. I absolutely can. I absolutely can.